Chainstay length has been making a lot of buzz lately. Some people swear by short chainstays, while others claim that the longer, the better. But who's right? And maybe more importantly, how much difference can a few millimeters at the back of the bike really make? Well, today we're gonna find out using science. Meet the rear axle dynamics rig, or as I like to call it, the Rad Rig. We're going to be using this little guy to test two claims that you've probably heard bike reviewers and maybe even your own friends make. The first is that shorter chainstays can make a bike feel poppier or more maneuverable. And the second is that longer chainstays make a bike feel more balanced and stable. Hopefully, this will demystify a surprisingly important component of bike design and more importantly, help you decide what to look for in your next bike. So without further ado, let's get nerdy. The first experiment we're going to test is that first one, and that is that shorter chainstays make a bike feel poppier. But before I get there, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Rad Rig. Up here at the front of the bike, we have our front axle, and behind our front axle, we have our handlebars. Here in the middle, we have our rider, represented by this 5-pound kettlebell, and then in the back, we have 3 different rear axle positions that is going to simulate 3 different chainstay lengths. We have a short length, a mid length, and a long length. Now again, the claim we're trying to test is whether shorter chainstays are going to make this bike poppier, or in other words, easier to get the front wheel off the ground. So to test that, we're gonna use this little fish scale. We're gonna attach it to the handlebars and measure in newtons how much force it takes to lift this front just off the ground like that. As you can see, right now we are in the long chainstay setting, and if I come around in front of this table here so I can read my scale, hook it on there and pull up, I see that it's taking right about 18.1 newtons to lift that front wheel off the front of the table. Now, let me go ahead and take this back wheel off and we'll go down to the mid chainstay option and see what happens. All right, so now we're in our mid chainstay. Let's take our little fish measure, hook it to our handlebars once again, and we can see that this time around, it's right around 16.7 newtons. So by going from the longest chainstay setting to the middle chainstay, we've already decreased the amount of force that I had to put on that front axle to lift it up by about 1.5 newtons. Let's go on to this final short chainstay and see what happens. All right, so here we are in our shortest chainstay setting. You can already see that we don't really have enough room for our wheels in this short chainstay. And that's kind of a tangent point I want to make here real quick, and that is to get chainstays as short as possible, it sometimes means a smaller wheel size. That's why, say, dirt jumpers typically have 26-inch wheels. Or I should say that's one of the reasons. It allows those chainstays to get extra short to make the bike that much, theoretically, easier or less force to pull the front end up. But let's find out if that's true right now. Again, the number to beat is about 16.7 newtons. Here we go. Lifting up here. Oh, I can already tell that's way lighter. That is about 12.7 newtons. So going from the middle to the short setting, it just shortened it up by 4 newtons. So we went about 1.5 newtons from the longest to the middle and 4 newtons from the middle to shortest. And that also shows something else here important, and that is that the shorter we go, the closer we bring that axle in to the rider's weight, we get it exponentially easier time lifting the front wheel. It takes exponentially less force. So a lot of people say, how much difference can a few millimeters really make? I mean, the difference between 435 and 430 millimeter chainstays, it's just half a centimeter. But it actually, as we can see here, can make a pretty big difference. Now, obviously, these axle positions are exaggerated so that on this cheap, crappy fish scale, we can actually see some numbers, but it's the same thing that's going on your bike. Now, we're gonna talk more about the implications of this here in just a second, but right now, I wanna move on to claim number 2 and the corresponding experiment I have for it, and that's that longer chainstays make a bike feel more balanced. Since we already have the bike in the short chainstay setting, let's just leave that here. What I'm gonna do is use these 2 scales under each wheel. And what we should see is that as the wheelbase extends, or in other words, this rider's weight gets closer to the middle, the rear center is starting to look closer to the front center length, it should evenly distribute the weight between both of those scales. But again, that's just the claim. Let's see if it's true. It looks like on our front scale, we are now reading 964 grams, and on our back scale, we're reading 2,836 grams, or about 2.8 kilograms. So there's almost exactly 3 times as much weight on this rear wheel than the front wheel. Okay, now let's see what happens when we move this chainstay back to the middle position. Cool, here we go. Middle chainstay length, we're looking at 1,338 grams at the front and 2,460 at the rear. So about 1.3 kilograms and 2.5 kilograms. We've already gotten quite a bit closer, or in other words, a more balanced feel by moving to that middle chainstay setting. But we've got one more test to do, and that's the long one. All right, let's throw it on the scales. And we are now reading 1,610 grams up front, or 1.6 kilograms, and 2,194 grams in the back, or about 2.2 kilograms. So with each axle change position from shortest to longest, we saw that we got more weight on the front wheel and less weight on the rear wheel. That rider's weight is getting pretty close to being in the middle of the bike. And yeah, that really does create a more balanced, stable feel. Now, is this bike going to be harder to bunny hop and manual and wheelie? Definitely. You're gonna have to put a lot more force on the handlebars to pull that off the ground. But when going through rough, chunky sections of trail or around corners, this bike is gonna feel a lot more predictable and stable. You're gonna have to do less work moving your body in between the wheels because you're already pretty dang centered. So hopefully these little crude experiments and the brief examples I've given are starting to help clear this up in your mind a little bit. But right now, I want to transition and talk more about my personal experience riding bikes with various chainstay lengths and my preference and how that might relate or not relate to you. If you're a regular here on the Bikes Online YouTube channel, then you probably already know that I love riding on flow trails and jump lines. So it should probably come as no surprise that my personal bike, the Polygon Sisk UT, has nice short chainstays. That keeps it really poppy. It's actually one of the more poppy bikes I've ridden, and I love it. But there are some trade-offs. The biggest of those comes in the corners. Now, I'll be honest, I am not a very great cornerer to begin with. And I think the fact that I'm running the short chainstays with a high-rise bar and short stem that really puts my weight back towards the back of the bike is not helping in that category. In fact, when I get on bikes with longer chainstays, like the Colossus TLE, I find that I can actually corner a good bit better. And this just again gets that idea of stability and balance. On my bike that's set up to have my weight so far biased to the rear, I really have to put in conscious effort to move forward and weight that front wheel evenly around corners. But on the TLE, I'm already kind of in the center of the bike. And so again, feels more balanced. I'm able to more easily carry speed through the corner without my front end washing out or feeling like I'm leaning too far back over the back of the bike. Now, speaking of the TLE, that bike is not poppy. Now, yes, it's an e-bike, it's heavy, I get that. And comparing it apples to apples with my trail bike probably isn't very fair. But I'd go as far to say that the TLE is actually harder to manual or bunny hop than the Colossus T8E, which is a much heavier full power EMTB. And surprise, surprise, the reason for that is chainstay length. The T8E, despite having more travel and being more of an enduro focused bike, actually has shorter chainstays, just 435 millimeters. Again, that TLE has 450 millimeter chainstays. That means that riding the heavier bike, since my weight's already more biased, it takes less force for me to lift those handlebars up. And therefore, the bike feels a lot more poppy and maneuverable despite being heavier. So as with all things in cycling, there are trade-offs. Short chainstays really do make a bike feel more playful or maneuverable, and longer chainstays really mathematically make it more balanced. Which one you choose is going to be up to you and what your riding preferences are. Now, if you have experience riding bikes with various chainstay lengths, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Are you in team short chainstay, or do you like longer chainstays? While you're there, I'd appreciate it if you take just a second to go ahead and like this video and hit that subscribe button. After you've done that, grab your bike, regardless of what the chainstay length is, get out there and get ripping.